This week brought yet another reminder that one of America's great institutions is quietly disappearing. Macy's department stores is closing more stores. Shopping malls continue to reinvent themselves. More and more purchases arrive in cardboard boxes on our front porch instead of in shopping bags from the trunk of our car. It's tempting to think this is just another business story, but it isn't. It's the latest chapter in one of the greatest revolutions in modern history. A revolution in how ordinary people buy things. For 150 years, every generation has believed it was witnessing the future of commerce, and every generation's been right. Today I want to take you on a journey from the neighborhood general store to the grand department stores of America's greatest cities and the world, to Sears' Roebuck catalog, to suburban shopping malls, and finally to Amazon. Because the history of shopping isn't really about shopping, it's about how capitalism continually reinvents itself. Imagine, you're living in America in 1850. You need a new pair of boots, or a shovel, or a bolt of cloth. Where do you go? You go to the general store. The general store is exactly what it sounds like. One building, a little bit of everything. There weren't aisles to browse. There weren't shelves filled with dozens of brands. You walked in, up to the counter. The merchant stood behind it. You told him what you needed. By the way, here in the Great Smoky Mountains, we see the remnants of these great general stores. I love them. He disappeared into the back. Maybe he had it, maybe he didn't. Prices weren't fixed. Everything was negotiable. Shopping was not an entertainment. It was something you needed to do. It was a chore. If you lived on a farm 20 miles outside of town, that trip might consume your entire day. That's why you did it infrequently. People bought less, made more themselves, repaired things. Even my grandfather did that, instead of replacing them. In many ways, shopping hadn't changed much since medieval Europe. Then something extraordinary happened. Railroads, transportation, factories, mass production. Suddenly, manufacturers could produce more goods than ever before. The problem wasn't making things anymore. It was getting to where people needed them, to where people were selling them. And that's when entrepreneurs began reinventing commerce themselves. One of the first great revolutionaries was an American, actually. His name was Aristide Boucicaut. In 1852, he transformed a modest Paris shop called Le Bon Marché into something the world had never seen. Instead of haggling, fixed prices. Instead of keeping merchandise behind the counter, he put it out for customers to see for themselves. They could browse. Imagine that. Walking around simply looking at things. No pressure. No obligation to buy. He introduced generous return policies. Big deal. Think we went overboard, but fine. Seasonal sales, large display windows, reading rooms for husbands while their wives shopped. All I need now is just a chair, thanks. Restaurants, fashion shows, shopping became an experience. This is in the late 1850s. It wasn't simply about buying. It became an afternoon out. Other cities quickly copied the idea, and nowhere embraced it more enthusiastically than in the United States. By the late 19th century, every American city seemed determined to build the biggest, grandest department store in the country. Philadelphia had Wanamakers. Founded in 1876 by John Wanamaker, it became one of the great wonders of American retail. People came just to see the building. Featured electric lighting long before most homes had electricity. It had elevators that people rode simply for the novelty. And it still housed one of the largest pipe organs in the world. John Wanamaker also left us with one of the most famous business quotes ever spoken. Half the money I spend on advertising is wasted. The trouble is, I don't know which half. More than a century later, marketing executives are still trying to answer that question. Then there was Chicago. Marshall Field. His flagship store became synonymous with elegance. His philosophy was wonderfully simple. Sorry, give the lady what she wants. I think that's still good for today. That was revolutionary. Retailers had spent centuries telling customers what they could buy. Marshall Field suggested perhaps retailers should listen instead. In New York, shopping became theater. Gimbel's, Saks Fifth Avenue, Henry Bendel, still in our lifetime, B. Altman, Bloomingdale's. and of course Macy's. The Christmas windows became tourist attractions and still are to this day. Families dressed in their finest clothes simply to stroll down Fifth Avenue. They don't do that anymore. Shopping wasn't merely commerce, it became culture. Atlanta had Riches, founded in 1867. It wasn't simply a department store, it was part of Atlanta's identity. If you grew up in Georgia, Christmas wasn't complete without visiting Riches. We did that. Many remember the famous Pink Pig ride almost as fondly as opening presents. These stores became civic institutions. Every great city had one, or several. They weren't just places to buy socks. They were where young couples had lunch. Oh, some great movies there, right? Where children met Santa Claus, where fashion arrived first, where middle-class families celebrated Christmas. If you wanted to know whether a city had arrived, you'd look at what department stores it had. This wasn't just an American phenomenon, however. It was around the world. Paris had Galeries Lafayette, opened in 1894, beneath its magnificent glass dome. To this day, it feels more like a palace than a store. Tokyo had Mitsukoshi. Its roots stretch back to 1673 as a kimono merchant, but it reinvented itself as Japan's first modern department store in 1904. Japanese families would often dress in their finest clothes for a Saturday afternoon visit. By the way, they call it depato from department stores. Again, not because they needed anything, because shopping had become an event, a cultural phenomenon. Department stores, in many ways, the cathedrals of capitalism. Then came another revolution, one that reached people who had never set foot inside those buildings. Imagine living on a farm in Nebraska, Oklahoma, or Texas in 1900, rural Mississippi, or the mountains of Tennessee, close to where we are now. The nearest department store might be 100 miles away. Then one day, the mail arrives. Good news. Inside is something almost magical, a Sears Roebuck catalog. Hundreds, eventually more than 1,000 pages, everything imaginable. Furniture, bicycles, clothing, pianos, stoves, whole kits for houses, children's toys, women's hats, men's suits, farm equipment. Those houses were phenomenal. They were like build them yourselves, which I think is fantastic. Yes, entire houses. Sears would ship you the lumber, windows, doors, nails, and instructions. Must have been easier than IKEA. Thousands of Americans literally built their homes from Sears kits. People called it the consumer's Bible. Families spent evenings turning its pages together. Children circled Christmas presents. We did that also with the Montgomery Ward catalog, I think. Parents dreamed about new furniture. Young couples imagined the homes they would someday build. For rural America, the Sears catalog was the internet before the internet lived. Richard Sears has solved one of commerce's oldest problems: distance. You no longer needed to travel to the city came to you. It was shipped to you. Railroads. There's another wonderfully human story. Old Sears catalogs were so plentiful that many found a second home in outdoor privies. Toilet paper wasn't readily available in rural America. Generations of Americans can honestly say they learned about consumer capitalism one page at a time. Sorry, guys. History has a marvelous sense of humor. Then came the automobile, highways, suburbs, suburbia. After World War II, millions of Americans left crowded cities for new suburbs for many reasons. They gained larger homes, backyards, garages, safe neighborhoods, but they lost something that I think is still important to the human condition today: the old downtown, the town square, the place where everyone naturally gathered. An Austrian architect named Victor Gruen believed he had a solution. Most people remember him as the father of the shopping mall, but that's not really what he intended. His vision wasn't simply a place to shop. He imagined civic centers, the small kind, not the massive places. Libraries, concerts, medical offices, restaurants, apartments, fountains, gardens, children playing safely away from traffic. He wanted to recreate the European town square inside suburban America. Unfortunately, to me anyway, I think it failed. Developers discovered stores paid better than libraries. Eventually, malls became dominated by department stores, soulless, anchor tenants, food courts, gross. Movie theaters, we spent our 80s and 90s there. Arcades, teenagers wandering endlessly on Saturday afternoons pretending not to notice one another. If you grew up in the 1970s, 80s, or 90s, the mall wasn't where you shopped, it's where you went. It's where you lived outside your home. It's your first job, your first date. Yeah, pretty true. First kiss, your first disappointing haircut, as cheap and as bad as ever, they still have them. The mall became America's living room. Then, along came the internet. People often say Amazon killed the shopping malls. I don't quite think that's exactly quite right. Amazon simply solved the same problem Sears had solved a century earlier. Convenience. You don't have to leave your home. You don't have to leave your bed. At least not your couch. Only this time, instead of waiting 2 weeks for the train, a delivery van shows up tomorrow. We have a joke, actually, that there's a van down at the end of our street that just has what we think we'll need. Or this afternoon. Or in some cities, within a couple hours. Jeff Bezos did not invent mail order shopping. He perfected it for the digital age. And here's something interesting. The mall itself isn't exactly disappearing. I think it's getting it back to what it should have been at the beginning. It's evolving. Developers realize something Victor Gruen understood from the very beginning. People don't just want places to shop. They want places to gather. They want that old city center. Across America, we're seeing beautiful master planned communities creating entirely new downtowns. We live in one. Outdoor concerts, restaurants, breweries, hardware stores, doctors' offices, dog parks, apartments, small office buildings, walking trails, a lot of them. Dog parks, said that, green spaces, farmers markets, places where people linger, can gather on Saturday morning and talk. In many ways, we've come full circle. We're rediscovering the town square. Only now, with much better coffee. So what does all this tell us? I think most people misunderstand the history of commerce. They think it's about stores. It isn't. It's about reducing friction. The general store meant you didn't have to make everything yourself. The department store meant you didn't have to visit 10 different shops. Although that's still fun to do in New York City. The Sears catalog meant you didn't have to travel into town. The shopping mall meant you didn't have to drive downtown. Amazon means you barely have to leave your couch. Every generation thinks it has invented something entirely new. Usually it has simply found another way to solve the same old problem, making life a little easier. Making goods a little more accessible, making commerce just a little more convenient. That's why I don't believe the story ends with Amazon or with Mercado Libre. Somewhere right now, a young entrepreneur is working on the next chapter. Maybe drone deliveries. That's not going to be fun. Maybe AI shopping assistants. Probably already there. Maybe something none of us has imagined yet. If history teaches us anything, it's that commerce never stands still. One final thought. When historians look back, they often focus on wars, presidents, kings, leaders, revolts, revolutions, movements, but sometimes the biggest revolutions happen quietly. A woman browsing an apartment store for the first time. A farm family opening a Sears catalog by kerosene lamp. Teenagers spending Saturday afternoon at the mall. A cardboard box arriving on your porch with exactly what you ordered 24 hours earlier. These moments don't usually make history books, but they change the way billions of people do live. The history of retail is not actually the story of stores. It's the story of human ingenuity, of entrepreneurs constantly asking one simple question: how can we make this easier? And for 150 years, they've kept finding the answers, new answers at that. Thanks for joining me for another Roger Retrospective.